brain now, because the mind game, the externally implanted sense of reality, which becomes our experience reality for reasons we'll get into, is the bottom line of the conspiracy. What actually is happening is that the global population is under a hypnotic spell. It's in a hypnotic trance, literally. And when we talk about people beginning to see through it and beginning to see what's actually happening in the world compared with what we're told is happening, we talk about people waking up. We talk about the time that we woke up. That's precisely what we're doing. We're waking up from hypnotic trance, and that's why when this, if you like, this symbolically, these fingers are clicked, and we start to break out of the spell, we start to see things in the world that are patently obvious to us then that we couldn't see before. Why? It's the same reason why when a stage hypnotist brings these subjects out of the hypnotic trance, those subjects suddenly look around the audience and think, what's happening? Where have I been? What's going on? Because they suddenly are experiencing life as it is, rather than they've been implanted to believe it is during the stage show. And that's what's happening to us globally and collectively, and that's how it's done. Without that, it couldn't happen.
Well, this is what we, again, are finding out about in the public sector, as you mentioned. Now, what's going on in the private sector behind closed doors has been going on for years. They've been trying to find out how to microwave energy into the human mind to create states of mind, states of desire, states of fear, states of want, states of happiness, and all the rest of it. There are, of course, you've talked about this for many years, a number of electronic platforms that can be used to distribute these kinds of embedded frequencies. I firmly believe that within television and the mass media, of course, there's no regulation for any of these technologies. Those technologies, in fact, exist and do stimulate people to react in ways that are, by design, intended to profit those who are promulgating these frequencies.
Absolutely, and in the research for Tales from the Time Loop, I looked in considerable detail at subliminals, which incidentally, you used a very interesting word there. You used the word embedded. These messages that can be identified, and I've got some pictures in the book to show, in advertisements and political advertisements and what have you. These subliminal means the conscious mind cannot see immediately, most people anyway, what is actually in the picture. They can only see what appears to be in the picture. But messages are put in, subliminal messages, which the subconscious picks up, but the conscious does not.
Oh, the subconscious reads it loud and clear.
Exactly. The subconscious mind reads everything, backwards, upside down, everything. It's like a sponge that takes everything in, whereas the conscious mind only takes in a fraction of what actually enters the eyes. And so there are messages going to the subconscious mind, which is really what these guys are after, because if you can manipulate the reality of the subconscious, it filters down to the conscious, and at that point the conscious thinks, I've just had a great idea, I've just had a thought, I tell you what I think this. Whereas really it's entering at the subconscious as an implanted thought, and then it's filtering down to the conscious. And interestingly, what they call these subliminal messages that are put in there, subliminal meaning below the threshold of the conscious mind to see it, is embeds. Now, what a surprise that the Pentagon should come up with the term embed or embedded for reporters with the troops in Iraq. That's exactly what those reporters were. They were subliminal. They were giving the conscious mind the message, hey, I'm telling you what's happening in this war, but what they're actually doing subliminally is telling you what the authorities were allowing them to tell you was happening in this war. And this subliminal, this attack on the subconscious is absolutely at the heart of what the Illuminati want. They actually want the subconscious more than the conscious, because for me, the conscious is the observer and experiencer of reality, whereas the subconscious is the creator of it.
Well, that's the mother lode,
that experiments have shown that 1.5 seconds before the conscious mind decides to do something, speak, move its hand around, whatever, a second and a half before that happens, that conscious thought, I'm going to do this, the electrical signals have begun in the brain to make it happen. So where is reality being generated from?
A second and a half.
I don't think.
A second and a half.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I had a story out of the UK the other day. You talked about those embedded reporters. It is now estimated that, and this is by an independent agency, that at least, at minimum, 70% of the news, the alleged news that these embedded reporters and journalists were issuing forth during this so-called war in Iraq, this most recent one, the slaughter in Iraq, was wrong. Completely fallacious. Might as well have been just written by some script writer with an old typewriter sitting at a desk in Hollywood somewhere. Just a joke.
But when you are trying to sell a false reality, of course, lying through the media is absolutely fundamental to that. Without it, you can't do it.
Indeed. All right, hold on, David. We'll pause and come right back with more. David Icke is my guest tonight. His new book, Tales from the Time Loop, the most comprehensive expose of the global conspiracy ever written, and all you really need to know to learn to be truly free. Be right back. Back with David Icke and his new book, Tales from the Time Loop. Highly anticipated. It is here and ready to go. All right, my friend, this issue of the subconscious mind being the prize. I could not agree more. This is what they have been shooting at for a long time. Now, we've talked in years gone by, you've talked thousands of times in front of groups of people, that television, and I've said this, I think you agree, is the most ruthless, vicious weapon ever unleashed on humankind. It is so powerful that I don't think anyone has adequately in the public domain assayed the amazing effect it has on billions of people. It's that strong, and the imagery built into the television programming is not just visual, not just auditory, but as I said, there is another level or two or three going on there. These are embedded signals, frequencies, whatever, and they're not just hidden voices saying, go out and buy this or buy that. There's some really nasty stuff coming down the road, and it's being developed right now, and much of it's already been deployed.
It's really funny, Jeff. When I was a kid up in Leicester, in England here, I had this experience one night. Back in the days of black and white television, show how old I am, really. And I was sitting
39.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Me too.
And I was watching this program. It was just a kind of a drama, and it opened up with this white dot pulsating at the center of the television. It pulled back, and this family was sitting around watching it in a complete trance. I mean, they were just like completely gone.
Scary.
They cut to another house and another house and another house, and everyone's kind of sitting there in the same trance. And I didn't realize at the time, but I do now, as a kid, that really hit me, that image, and stayed with me for a long time. And I realize now why, because at some subconscious level I was seeing something and realizing something, and the hypnotist in the corner of the room, which is what the television is actually been more and more profound in the way it works while I've researched Tales from the Time Loop. Because what happened was that I reached the point when I wrote a book called Alice in Wonderland, the World Trade Center Disaster, where I said to my wife, if I'm going to take this story on, I need to go in awareness, not in some dream. I need to go in awareness into other dimensions, and I need to experience them, and I need to look at this world from that perspective. And what happened was in in January this year, as a result of a very synchronistic invitation, I went to the Amazon rainforest with a group of people to talk to them, but also to participate in something called ayahuasca, which is a kind of it's a plant in South America that shaman have been using for literally centuries to take people into other states of awareness. And over 2 nights, I went into other dimensions of reality, if you like, and literally for it must have been in total about 7 hours. Some voice, as loud as mine is now, spoke to me about the nature of reality and how we create it and what this world actually is. And it was so profound and just incredible stuff. And I detail it in the book. When I came back to England, I started researching over many months scientific research, quantum physics, research into the nature of reality, to see if that would correspond with what this voice had told me in such detail, and it corresponded magnificently. And I learned so much that made not just pennies drop about the nature of this conspiracy and how it works. Whole banking systems dropped in my head. And one of the things I didn't realize, Jeff, and it's fundamental to television, is that when we say things like, I saw it with my own eyes, well, we actually don't. And when people say, seeing is believing, it actually is, as we know, not least you from doing this show every night, what we think is, and what the prevailing, quote, wisdom is of something is usually the opposite. And it turns out to be the case in this subject. Seeing is not believing. It turns out that believing is actually seeing, because this is how it works. This is not, some someone said to me, oh, this is how it works, and some contact said, and this guy said this to me. This is actually mainstream scientific research. When information enters the eyes, it is first of all upside down, and it is 2-dimensional. This information then passes through the brain, and it does not become a 3-dimensional scene that we think is outside and around us now as we're listening to this show, until it hits the visual cortex in the brain. And that's the only place that this 3-dimensional, quote, world actually exists.
Amazing. Stand by right there, David. We have to pause and something to think about for the next couple minutes. Come right back and pick up our conversation with David Icke, his new book, Tales from the Time Loop, after this. Tales from the Time Loop with David Icke tonight. His new book is just out. It is it's another blockbuster, and you Icke fans and you fans who don't know anything about David Icke really want to pick this one up. It is loaded from cover to cover with a glimpse of realities that you won't get in the controlled media. You know, David, the big plan for China was for, I think the target was by the end of the year 2001 to have a television set in every home, functionally speaking, in the entire country, all 1 point whatever billion people they have. They know. I mean, that is the mechanism and the imagery. You talked about the time as a young man you saw this program and what it was doing to people. I remember the very time that happened to me. It was in college, and I came into a room and there were 6 or 7 people sitting around looking at the television, and they were gone. They're gone. They're not with us. They're somewhere else. And I envisioned tubes coming out of the back of the television, rolling across the floor and then looping up, and then with a needle stuck into each one of their arms into a major vein, controlling them. And that was my image, my flash on reality. And it stuck with me ever since. And it's all too true. Now, you just made the point that inside the mind is really the only place where 3-dimensional reality exists, if it exists at all.
like I say, over the last year, the nature of the conspiracy, that is, becomes so crystal clear, and how it works, and how we're manipulated on a mass scale. As I was saying, when information enters the eyes, it's two-dimensional, it's upside down, and it's in a very, very different state to that which we manifest in the visual cortex in the brain as a apparently three-dimensional world around us, which is actually in our minds. But the crucial point is that experimentation has shown that between that information entering the eyes and hitting the visual cortex and becoming a three-dimensional, quote, world, an editing process takes place, and up to and sometimes more than 50% of the detail that enters the eyes is changed before it hits the visual cortex. As it passes through the brain, stuff is taken out that is there, and stuff is put in that isn't there, before it becomes a three-dimensional scene. And this editing process, and this is the key, takes place on the basis of that person's belief. This is why I said earlier, they are seeking to manipulate our sense of what is real, because of this process that I'm talking about, will become our experience of what is real. It's like a self-perpetuating prophecy. This is what I believe reality is. See, look, reality is like I thought it was. And what is happening, and the stage hypnotist analogy is so profound. What does a stage hypnotist do? I've been to see a couple of stage hypnotists in the last few months as part of this research, and watched them at work. They are implanting a false reality into the person's mind, i.e., there's a giraffe in the room. Now, of course, when the information from that room enters the eyes, there's no giraffe there. But by the time it's passed through that implanted belief and hits the visual cortex, a giraffe is put in there that isn't there, and it's like, there's a giraffe in the room. Now, you try telling someone in that hypnotic state that there's no giraffe in the room. What do you mean there's no giraffe in the room? Look at it, there it is, right? This is what is happening to the global population. We are being, through the television and what we laughingly call the education system, in which teachers, brackets, hypnotists, are implanting a false reality minute by minute through a young person's life. We are being given this false reality. And I read a book, an excellent book, called The Holographic Universe by a man called Michael Talbot. Came out in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells a story in there, Jeff, which so sums up what I'm talking about here. A story that actually he experienced. And what it was that his father had a party for friends and had a professional hypnotist come along to do party tricks. And he did all the tricks. There's an elephant in the room, and you're eating a potato, but it's actually an apple. And of course, because of your implanted belief, you're eating a potato, but you're actually tasting an apple. This is what the five senses are, just illusions. And what actually happened, the point of the story, raising this story, is that there was a man called Tom who was in a hypnotic state, and the hypnotist said to him just before he brought him out, when I bring you back to a waking state, you are not going to be able to see your daughter. And this Tom guy is sitting down, so he brought him out of the trance, and just before the hypnotist had led his daughter to stand right in front of him. So this Tom guy is sitting down, looking in the belly of his daughter. He comes out of the trance, or thinks he has, and the hypnotist says, "Can you see your daughter in the room?" He looks around. He says, "No, I can't see my daughter. She's not here." His daughter's laughing, giggling, and he can't hear her. The hypnotist then went behind the daughter and pushed something in the small of her back and said to Tom, "What am I holding?" And he looked kind of bemused, because it seemed to be obvious to him. He said, "You're holding a watch." He said, there's an inscription on the watch. What does it say? He read the inscription. His daughter's standing between him and the watch. And people would say, "That's impossible. How can that be? That's ridiculous. It's a mystery." No, it's not. Because of the implanted belief that his daughter wasn't in the room, the information with his daughter in the room entered his eyes. Yes, of course it did. But by the time it went through this editing process on its way to the visual cortex, his belief implanted that the daughter wasn't there edited her out of the scene. And this is what Credo Mutwa, the official historian of the Zulu nation, told me years ago. I said to Credo in South Africa, if all these non-human entities are around us, why don't more people see them. And he said because it is so fantastic compared with people's conditioned reality that their brain edits them out because it does not fit the scene of what they believe should be there.
Sure.
And all these years later, this primitive man in the bush, this primitive black man, what do they know? I went to university, I involved him, has actually shown to be absolutely right. That's what we're doing. Now, if you've got people, Jeff, who understand this process of how we create reality, they know that if they can, through the television and through education and all these kind of these mantra, the implanted messages we receive all the time, if they can implant our sense of what's real, then we will edit our reality to
conform
in line with what we have been manipulated to believe is real.
Sure.
That's what's happening. We're in a hypnotic trance, and we need to wake up from it.
It's amazing. I remember when you and Credo and I spent a couple of hours together, or 3 hours, I've forgotten which, on the program. It was a remarkable demonstration.
It's fantastic. And this knowledge that I'm talking about, it's scientific knowledge, scientific experimentation, it's actually been known by people outside the mainstream for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Sure.
And we're now just beginning to see it for what it is. It's a mind game. And,
it sure is. Okay, all right. Hang on, David. We'll be right back in just a couple of minutes as we roll along. Okay, and we're back talking with David Icke live in the UK. His new book, Tales from the Time Loop, is out. David, do you want to direct our listeners, to anyone in particular to pick up the book, or is it just out there?
Well, the website, davidicke.com, Icke being I-C-K-E, one word, davidicke.com is the place to get it fastest.
Yeah.
It's dispatched in 48 hours, if not earlier.
Good.
And there's a number, which is 903-876-3416, 903-876-3416, where they can get hold of it very quickly.
Okay, all right. Mind is the mind is the prize. Now, I've talked to people for years about the various methods and technologies of delivering mind control frequencies, embedded and direct and otherwise. Everything from vans parked across the street, beaming images down the street into people's mind. We know there is voice-to-skull technology now. They can actually put inside the mind voices, music, anything with no auditory. They bypass the entire auditory input system to the brain and end up inside. We know that. That's been around for years. We have satellites. We have aircraft. We have ground wave emergency network, those broadcasting towers which are strewn all about the United States. We have now cell phone masts everywhere. They're all over the place. The biggest means of distribution, though, may be our actual electronic grid, which is known to be able to carry an infinite amount of information. In fact, we could get our internet connections right over the electric lines if they'd let us. I mean, that capability is there. So all of these methodologies, all of these modalities are with us around the clock, in which they, whoever they may be, can use to program, influence, and otherwise control, manipulate, and subvert the human mind and free will. Now, we talked about that. We could also talk about fluoride in the water. We can also talk about unintentional pollution of the water and the environment, and let's do that. You were in the Amazon rainforest. Human beings are destroying their planet at a record rate. And let me start out by asking you just a generic question here, which you've heard before. The people who have their hands on the controls at the top, the international globalist financiers and corporate moguls who are vampiring the planet to death, show no signs, David, of slowing down. Their rape of the environment, the destruction of the earth. Why not? Do they know something is coming and it doesn't matter a whit if they slow down or not? Or are they just driven blindly by greed?
Well, I think it's the more that I understand this as the years have passed, they're changing the nature of the environment of the planet to suit people that are not human, because these people are not human, and we've talked about it before. When we look through our eyes, we see a tiny, tiny frequency range, which is that which the eyes and the other five senses can access. And people are under the illusion that when they look at a space, whatever it is, looking at a room now, that we are seeing everything in the space that we appear to be looking at. Well, this is provably nonsensical. We're seeing a tiny fraction of reality. This is why we can be in a room with a cat, and the cat will jump around, apparently reacting to what is to us empty space. And we go, what's wrong with the cat? The cat's going stupid. What's the matter with you? Stop it. When actually what's happening is the cat is not seeing the empty space that we are perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually got a greater visual frequency range. It is seeing things in that space that we can't see, just as dogs have a higher range of sound that they can access than we do. So there are entities just outside the visual frequency range of the five senses that are actually manipulating this world, and they do it by taking over, quote, possessing the mental and emotional processes of certain bloodlines. And these entities, it becomes clearer and clearer to me, are in the process of changing the nature of this global environment that suit them but not suit us. There was actually a movie called Arrival, not Arrival 2, which was awful, but Arrival 1 with Charlie Sheen, which was actually telling this basic story of how non-human entities took over NASA and took over the government, et cetera, while appearing to be human. And that the whole point of the movie was that they were changing the environment. They were heating it up. They were destroying this and destroying that because it was to suit them rather than humans that are here. So I think that bizarre as it may seem, although people listen to this show with open minds won't find it as bizarre as you might find it on CNN, but that's one level of it. And another point that you bring up is very, very relevant. That these chemicals, you see, this is the one thing that what I am is I'm a fitter together of pieces, because there are enormous numbers of people now, hallelujah, brother and sister, who are actually researching certain elements of this in detail, certain pieces of the puzzle. But when you fit the pieces together, the world looks far more logical in terms of the way it is structured than it appears to be chaotic and ridiculous.
Well, the illusion, yeah.
When you realize what the goal is, you realize why things that seem on the face of it illogical are actually make perfect sense. And one of them is the things that I've realized is that all these different pressure groups trying to protect the environment, pressure groups trying to expose the banking system, pressure groups about vaccines, pressure groups about additives in food. What they need to realize is that they all are challenging the same force, which is behind all of these apparently unconnected things that are happening in the world. And one of the key things is food additives and vaccines and stuff, because they are seeking to change us genetically. And they are seeking to use these chemical implants in food and what have you to make it more and more difficult for us to manifest the true magnificence of our consciousness, manifesting it through what appears to be the physical body, but that's an illusion as well. And it's interesting, the names that come up. I mean, one of the ads in the show tonight, I noticed, mentioned aspartame. Aspartame is this bloody lethal substance, 200 times sweeter than sugar, that was manipulated through the various authorities, like the Food and Drug Administration.
Well, you know who was on hand to make sure it got approved, don't you?
Donald Rumsfeld.
That's right.
Exactly. And that's the point I'm making, is that these people who are manipulating on one level, they like he's now defense secretary, manipulating this ludicrous invention, the war on terrorism. You find that they turn up at other times in their lives in other areas of this agenda, because the war on terrorism and putting aspartame in food is actually connected And the connection is this agenda for not only the global fascist state, but actually bringing it about by suppressing the true magnificence of the human mind. And this is, and it was kind of interesting when you were reeling off all those different elements of how our minds are being attacked. And what really hit me is something I've understood as the years have passed, is the reason we are being hit by so many different ways and means of manipulating our minds, etc., is because our minds are so unbelievably powerful. We are genius. We are infinite genius. And therefore, to suppress that means that they have to hit us in all these different ways, and constantly too. But the power of the mind is greater than anything these silly people can actually throw at us. The key is understanding that and accessing that, because if you are a massive guy with big muscles and what have you, and you go in the ring with Mike Tyson, then you're going to sort him out. If you go in the ring, no matter how potentially big and muscular you are, however good a boxer you are, if you go into the ring with Mike Tyson with your hands tied behind your back, he's going to knock the living hell out of you. And this is what is happening. They have manipulated our minds, so we are actually operating on a fraction of its power and potential, and therefore they can manipulate us and implant these things. When we access the true magnificence of our minds, that it's too powerful for them to have any influence. And that is what is happening in more and more people. We are, quote, waking up to who we really are, as opposed to the ordinary man and woman in the street. What can I do, mate? I've got no power. That people are manipulated to believe in. And of course, because of this editing process that I talked about, if we are implanted with the belief that we are ordinary and powerful, we will edit reality so that we experience a reality in which we are ordinary and powerless. You know, I mean, this is what's happening. We need to understand the true magnificence of who we are, and this thing will fall.
Well, the whole game is to keep people confused with chaos, the dumbing down process through the schools. We are really being impinged upon from multiple directions to keep us hamstrung and confused. So we don't access that collective consciousness, that God consciousness that we all have, the universal power, because they know now through laboratory work that when an X number of people begin to get together and mind meld on a higher level of consciousness, there is tremendous power. They don't want that to happen, of course.
Well, interestingly, I'll go into that in the book, the so-called 100th monkey syndrome. That is clearly manifesting now, and this is the process through which we are going to bring this down. In fact, we already are. Although it seems to be at its most powerful, it's actually in its death throes. Because this 100th monkey syndrome, where they found that once a certain number of a species, and it's nothing like half, very few, really. Once that few have learned something new, suddenly, inexplicably, but it's not, the whole of that species, or vast numbers of it, can suddenly do what others have had to learn spontaneously without being shown.
No, it's that connectivity. We're all, they don't want us to know we're all connected. They like to keep us thinking compartmentalization, individuality, and all the rest of it. On the other hand, thinking as a group has its drawbacks, which the school system is trying to teach. So there are a lot of things to be defined here, and they're all defined in David Icke's new book, Tales from the Time Loop. And again, you can get it simply by calling the 800 number. It's a 903 number. It's 903-876-3416. Back with David Icke. David, since you've been on, a couple new developments in your life. One primary one I want to ask you about so you can clarify for people. There were rumors running around that David Icke was retiring, that he was calling it a day. And I said, no, he's just not going to go around talking to 200 groups a year. It's not economical. It wears anybody out, and he can do much better by talking to large groups on programs like this and so forth. So tell us about that decision.
Well, exactly. I mean, I will not be retiring. The word does not exist in my vocabulary. No. I'm certainly not going to retire at 51. I mean, goodness me. And
especially when you're only 39. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, you're welcome.
What happened was that I've been on the road now, as you know, for like the best part of 14 years, I was getting worn out. And also, there comes a time, we talk about creating our own reality, there comes a time where you say, hey, you know, I'm not accepting this reality anymore, I'm going to change it. And this has to go on to a higher level, communicating to more and more people. And so far from retiring, what I'm doing is changing the way I do things, so I actually get to more people and use myself physically in a much more efficient way. Right. And that's what I'm doing. I mean, you know, Tales from the Time Loop, I mean, the reaction to it and the interest in it has just been phenomenal, more than any other book I've written so far.
Oh, really?
Big time. And so it's a time when I'm pushing on, not pulling back. But you know, we really do have to, look at the way we do things and see if we can do it more efficiently. And I was getting to the point where physically I was getting absolutely worn out. And, you know, I don't want to, get paranoid and all that stuff, but there's no doubt the stuff is being fired at me and other researchers that is designed to undermine us physically.
Oh, everything from so-called psychic attack to actual microwave weapon attacks, it doesn't matter. And I'm convinced, David, that psychic attack, psi attacks can be maybe the most devastating of all.
Yeah, you're right. And one of the things that's happened over the last few months is that it happened to me in North Carolina only literally a few days ago when I spoke there. There's been a rather strange pattern in which I would arrive at a hotel. This has happened more than once in the recent months. I would arrive at a hotel feeling okay for a talk, say 2-3 days before, get over the jet lag, and I would get hit with the same symptoms. And I would go down very, very rapidly with exactly the same symptoms that I got in a completely different place a few weeks earlier, doing exactly the same thing. But it's never prevented me from speaking. Unpleasant as I felt in North Carolina, I spoke for 7 hours, and will always do so because the power of the mind is far greater than the illusion of the body. But this is definitely happening. And so what it's done is just concentrated my mind to focus on and making sure this ceases to affect me. And the power of the mind is much greater, as I said earlier, than anything they can throw at us. But you go along in life and you don't think about these things. You've got other things on your mind. This has actually focused my mind to make sure that this stops happening, and I will do that.
One of the things that you made your initial hallmark talking about was the economy, finances, the illusion of money, and that, of course, was extrapolated all the way until tonight's conversation when we're talking about the illusion of reality and the mind and all the rest of it. Money. It's been amazing to watch what's happened on the world economic scene, watching these shell gamers moving things around. Now the euro is kicking the dollar's butt. Gold is moving. It's what a sideshow. What a main event.
Well, the thing is, Jeff, that as you know, these guys tell you what's going to happen. All you have to do is read the signs. When George Soros and Warren Buffett come out, as they did recently, and predict the dollar is going to collapse.
Goodbye.
That means it is. It means the agenda for it to collapse. And what we've seen is that happening. They are seeking now to undermine massively the American economy, and by doing that, to undermine the American people, and to concentrate their minds on more and more on survival, so they don't lift their heads up and say, "Oh my goodness, so that's going on."
Well, that's basically, Dave. Excuse me, but that's basically the I think that's the main course, the undermining of the economy. I mean, they've taken it politically apart, they've taken it socially apart,
right.
They've destroyed the educational framework of this country. It's structurally incompetent now, and now they're taking the dollar apart. So.
exactly, and that's been a long-term plan, which I heard about a long time ago. The plan was to destroy the dollar because they want a one-world currency, and therefore, the more they can undermine the key currencies, the more that people will be open to replacing them with something else. And interestingly, this euro, which is a massive stepping stone to the one world currency, is now being made very, very strong and given credibility. I mean, because if you're moving literally trillions of dollars around the world markets every day, then you decide if a currency goes up or a currency goes down.
Sure.
It's not, oh, is it going to go up? What do you think? Well, just ask them; they'll tell you. And the phenomenal kind of almost funny thing about the whole thing is there is no money, and money doesn't exist. There is no money. It's all credit. It's kind of funny. I was pointing out to someone the other day. On British notes, like the £10 note, the £5 note, the £20 note, it says just under, the value of the currency. It says, I promise to pay the bearer the sum of £5, £10, £20 on demand. And it's like, hold on a minute. I owe you £10, right? I give you £10. The debt's finished, right? Yeah, that's right. But hold on a minute. Well, so why am I paying you back that debt with a piece of paper that says I promise to pay you that money if you ever demand it? Why? Because that money is actually an IOU. That's all it is. I mean,
Sure.
It's hilarious, really. It's a complete con. And the money system is, of course, one of the fundamental ways that we're controlled and limited in our choice.
And look at the debt.
Action.
Look at the debt of the American consumer. Never been so much in debt in its life. It's huge. And now the holiday season is coming and so forth. And people will feel guilty and they'll be pushed and their buttons will be touched off when they see certain things. Anyway, it's like shooting fish in a barrel now. It's it's pathetically easy.
And again, it's a mind game.
Total.
The money system survives by people taking it seriously and believing it's real. Again, this editing process, if they realize that, money only has any power because we take it seriously, not because it has any value in itself, then the whole world economy would take on a very different light to people. And, of course, you mentioned Christmas coming up and all the grotesque debt that people get into. To celebrate what? To celebrate an ancient Babylonian midwinter festival that the Illuminati have turned into what we call Christmas. I mean, Christmas is just a Babylonian festival using different names. Instead of Tammuz, it's Jesus. I mean, it's just... wherever you look, whether it's this is what Christmas is and all that stuff, or whether it's money and all that stuff, it's all illusion. And when I was in the Amazon forest in this, so to say, other dimensional state.
By the way, is that the plant that has already been outlawed in the United States as an illegal?
I think it is outlawed in the United States.
Yeah.
Even in Brazil, it can only be used as part of a quote
religious, yeah, like peyote.
That's why we had some kind of Brazilian religious people there to make sure that
legitimize it. Well, how do you spell it again? The name of it?
Ayahuasca. Can I spell it? Ayahuasca. Because
Good. I've got it. You got it.
Don't talk to me about spelling, Jeff.
All right. Well, you're on another plane, and you're legitimate because there's some brilliant Brazilians there. What happened?
So when I went into this other dimensional state, what happened is I went into a place that was just, bliss is really not adequate. I went into a place where I was still self-aware, but I was everything that was. There was no point where I ended and the rest of reality, creation, whatever you want to call it, began. I was everything.
Now, oneness is also talked about, certainly by people who have experimented with LSD. Timothy Leary, half a century ago, practically talked about that same feeling of oneness. Once you're in that state and you realize that we are all one, you're part of the rocks, the trees, the water, the birds, the deer, the ducks. It doesn't matter. You're part of the same thing, vibrating at different levels.
Right.
Then it's tough. It's pretty tough to go back to business as usual.
Yeah, well, it is. But what this voice, it was a female voice, took that manifestation anyway, and it was so powerful, so loud, and so profound. What it said to me was, when this whole process started, was all you really need to know is this: infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion. And it repeated it over and over again. And in another way, what was being said is this: the existence of an infinite consciousness that is everything is the only truth. Everything else is the imagination of that consciousness manifesting illusory reality. In other words, it is the dreams of the one consciousness, but the only truth is the existence of that one consciousness, the oneness. It's interesting in the Matrix movies, the Neo character, if you rearrange the letters of Neo, of course, you get the word one. And he was described as the one. It's not that we are not in this imprisoned reality oneness. We are not part of the one. We are. The difference is this, and this voice pointed this out in a very profound way to me. It's that it's a matter of we are all one, and everything is all one. The question is, are you aware of that? When you are oneness, aware that you are oneness, then you have a certain view of reality, which is very different to the one we experience here. When you are oneness, but you believe that you are not, that you are a quote isolated individual, and everything is in parts, not a whole, then although you are still oneness, because your belief is in division and duality, you will experience that reality, because that's what you believe it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a matter of belief. And if you look through history...
Oh, David, hold on right there. Hold on, we have to pause. We'll come back. Hold on, we'll be right back. David Icke. One of the things that bothers me the most, David, is how Americans, and I imagine it's pretty much the same around the world now, have come to expect people to lie. They expect it. This is a nation of liars now. At the highest level, all the way down, and people expect it. That's pretty sad.
Yeah, and it's certainly the case here. I mean, the number of people that trust Tony Blair has plummeted. I mean, it's almost a national joke now. When Blair moves his lips, you know he's lying. I mean, so the credibility of politicians is collapsing. The number of people that bother to vote, of course, has gone down and down and down and down, and not just in America, but here too. And I think it's a good thing, because we talked earlier about this 100th monkey syndrome, and I can see it happening. The 100th monkey syndrome, for people who haven't come across it, is like I said earlier, when a few of a species is taught something new or learns something new, and suddenly, inexplicably, vast numbers of that species can suddenly do it spontaneously without being shown. This is a simple phenomenon. It's what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. There's a level at which we're all connected. It's like I call it consensus reality. It's like the internet, and we are like computers connected to the internet. So we are putting information into the collective mind, but the collective mind is also passing its reality onto us, and we're being affected by it. And every time someone learns something new, i.e. listens to this program, for instance, and realizes the world is not as they thought it was, that new reality is put into the collective mind, where it can be accessed internet style by anyone connected to the collective mind, i.e. anybody.
Good analogy, yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm seeing as these years have passed, particularly over the last few years, and really particularly since 9/11, is people who are beginning now to spontaneously, without reading books or anything like that, they're spontaneously beginning to see that there's a world is different to what they thought it was. I was very, very encouraged in the run-up to the Iraq Turkey shoot that when we had 1 million people on the streets of London protesting about it. Very large numbers of those people had never protested against anything in their lives before in that way. And when they talked about why they were doing it, they were articulating, not detail, of course, but the very strong feeling that there was an agenda going on here, and it wasn't the one they were being told. And this whole process of losing confidence in politicians, realizing that more and more that they're just lying through their teeth, because there's the secret agenda, and there is the movie to hide the secret agenda and to justify its introduction. And the movie, of course, demands a completely false reality. So this is why politicians lie all the time, the top politicians, because they're selling a false reality to people of what's going on and the reasons behind it. I think it's a good thing. And you know, I think it was Stuart Wilde who said once, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." It's a great line. And,
yeah. Well, you know, here my dad said once that anyone seeking public office should be barred from it.
Yeah, my father had a great saying. He used to say, people say that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He says, but there's another way of looking at this. Power attracts the corruptible. I think there's a lot of truth in that.
It sure does.
The fact that we're losing confidence en masse in politicians and not increasingly believing a word they say is a very good thing. And I think it's a manifestation of the breaking down of the hypnotic state, where we have to start facing the
It is in light of all these technologies a remarkable thing to see happen, and it has to be this instant transfer of commonality, this information that is transmitted without effort, without thought. It just goes. It's there. People just wake up one day. I've had emails from people. You've had emails from people that say, you know, I got up one morning and it clicked. I realized, and the people will sometimes say it was a terrible feeling of exhilaration and great loneliness at the same time, and great isolation. Then when I tried to talk to people, I was rejected. I was laughed at, and so there's a process by which people have to go through to really integrate that knowledge in a meaningful way in their lives. And sometimes it's not easy, but reading books like David Icke's Tales from the Time Loop will be a great help to you folks out there who are realizing and learning now that it is basically all a lie.
Yeah, interestingly, I went through that process big time in this country. I was on the front pages of national newspapers for days and days and weeks on end as someone who'd gone completely bonkers and mad, and I was laughed at and ridiculed. It's not happening now among people who bother to look at what I'm saying. And so it is a process that we all go through, but it's freedom. It's freedom from the implanted reality, and it's like literally, as I said earlier, the hypnotic or the hypnotist clicking his fingers, and suddenly you are looking and perceiving at a very different world you were before.
That's right. This of course, not only does it free a lot of people up, but the majority, unfortunately, is being polarized in the opposite direction. There is a backlash to awareness.
And it is between those who are becoming more hypnotized as they are implanting this belief more and more rigidly, and those who are waking up from the hypnotic state and seeing through it. That's where the polarity is coming from.
Exactly. Okay. All right. Stand by. Half an hour to go with David. We'll continue in just a few minutes. I'm Jeff Rentz. Glad you're along. Thanks for being here. And don't forget the website at Rentz, RENSE.com. Thanks for your wonderful emails of encouragement. We appreciate them. Welcome back. Talking to David Icke about his new book, Tales from the Time Loop. best book yet. And if you want to call in to order it, you can do so. 903-876-3416. 903-876-3416. Or just go to davidicke.com. That's spelled I-C-K-E. davidicke.com. All right, a half an hour to go with David. Lots to talk about. It's very difficult for me to gauge this, David, but I think this issue of waking up is happening perhaps on a much larger scale than I currently am able to grasp. The idea that America is a two-party political system, I think, is really beginning to wash away, finally. It's a joke. They're all on the same bus going to the same location. They're just sitting in different seats, of course. And, of course, speaking of courses, the people in Congress in this country, 98% of them are some of the lowliest types of excuses for people you'll ever want to see gathered in alleged positions of responsibility. The big joke is when they show up for work at the Capitol in the morning, they check their spines at the door.
And find them not to exist almost every time, I'm sure. It's like I said, my father said, power attracts the corruptible. And Congress, and indeed the House of Parliament here, are constant daily reminders of that. Same
thing over there. Same thing.
Same thing. Oh, yes. It's like you have 57 million people in Britain. You have 280 million people in America, and there are large numbers of them who are intelligent, who are straight, who have a desire to do what they believe to be right. The question then comes, why do those that get into positions of power not represent those people, or why don't those people get into those positions of power? It's because to get to the top of the greasy pole, or even halfway up in politics, you have to be ruthless in your pursuit of power, and you have to do what those that have the power to advance you tell you to do. So it's all corruption.
It's a sellout from the very beginning, the very first day.
Exactly,
mm-hmm.
and people who do try to do what they believe to be genuinely right get filtered out of this process,
or marginalized, mocked, or charged with crimes and such, and put away. And it's just I had a hope that there might be a little more integrity left in your system, but apparently not.
Oh no, afraid not. I mean, the integrity has been shown to an extent with Blair cabinet ministers who have resigned as a result of the Iraqi war.
None of
What's kind of interesting, Jeff, about that is that three ministers who have resigned from the Blair government, one some time ago over another issue, have all said that what is happening is that cabinet government is finished, that there is a small group, unelected, around Tony Blair that is coming up with the policies, and Blair is pushing it through without any debate with his colleagues and without any feeling or acceptance of any criticism that they may have of the policy. And this is what we're seeing, and what these people are articulating is what we've talked about on this program for years, and that is that a tiny, tiny few people outside of the elected level are dictating policy through placemen, and Blair is a classic placeman, as is George Bush.
The lies, David, are so enormous now, and that goes back to the old axiom, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to get away with it if you repeat it often enough. I have never seen lying like I'm seeing now. It staggers me to watch it come out of these people's mouths and go essentially unchallenged. It doesn't go unchallenged, but the illusion is it goes unchallenged because the media, of course, is all controlled by a very few hands. So that's the answer.
Yeah, but I mean, things like Fix News, they call it Fox News because they misspell it, and the criminal news network, CNN, organizations like this, what are they doing? I mean, in the end, all that we talk about, no matter what subject we bring in, we're looking at the mind game. Of course, the reason they have to control the global media at ownership level, and they have to constantly control what people hear, is because they're implanting the hypnotic messages. This is reality. This is what's real.
Sure.
And when I watched, as I did in America, the coverage of Fox News, and CNN of the Iraqi war. I mean, it was utterly grotesque. I mean, the lies that were told daily, the unquestioning acceptance that if an official voice said something was true, then therefore it must be by definition. I have to say, of all the media in the world, and I've been in over 40 countries, the American media, even more than the British, and that's saying something, is the most corrupt and the most biased and the most controlled in terms of what it puts out of any media in the world.
Well, it's like the old Soviet Union state broadcasting. It's practically that tightly controlled now. It's a close analogy.
It is, and of course you have organizations like Clear Channel who are operating in Britain now.
They are.
Very close to the Bush family.
Wow.
These organizations, Murdoch and these people, they are there to control the media. And of course, what you have, in America, and it's just a coincidence.
David,
is Michael Powell, the head of the Federal Communications Commission, who is seeking, as Blair has done here, to allow corporations to own more and more and more of the media.
Well, he wanted to raise the limit. He wanted to take the limit off.
Exactly. And he's the son of Colin Powell, of course, who's the Secretary of State. I mean, what you find, and you'll have found this, of course, as well, is when you get to the upper echelons of these pyramids, and even at the level of Powell and Bush, you're nowhere near the top, because the real people that are orchestrating this whole agenda actually are operating in the shadows. They'll put themselves on public display. But even at that level, where you can see them, like the Powells and the Rumsfelds and the Bushes,
and
it's a very rarefied place, and these same family groups come up everywhere. It's no accident whatsoever that Powell's son is actually running the agenda for opening the media
communications
by virtually a handful of people.
How do monopoly?
In Britain, just to give you an example, when I was in television, I was a television presenter, as I know you were once. It was unthinkable when I was in television, started in television in the 1970s, that independent television in Britain would not have individual owners of the different independent stations all around Britain, in the regions of Britain. We have just reached the point now where the whole of that independent so-called television network in Britain, which was once owned by a number of companies operating in their own individual region, that is now owned by one company, the whole shebang. And of course, therefore, they are dictating through all
there it is. Okay, all right, stand by, David. Oh, and by the way, a quick note as we slide to the break. The Carlyle Company, the ex-president's club, is seeking now, apparently, or interested in buying into the Murdoch media empire. So they're going to expand as well. All right, be right back with David Icke. David Icke. Tales from the Time Loop is available right now at davidicke.com. That's ICKE, of course. Or you can call 903-876-3416. Two of the most infamous murders in recent UK history, of course, Princess Diana. And then there's the strange suicide of Dr. Kelly, which I guess is still capturing a good bit of the headline news over there.
Yeah, as somebody pointed out on a radio interview I was doing in a local station recently, there is this remarkable number of people involved in the very areas of research and what have you Dr. Kelly was involved in, who are, shall we say, no longer with us. And also, just a few years ago, we had the same pattern with scientists involved in high-tech computer systems involving, high-tech weapon, state-of-the-art weapon systems. Right. And what seems to happen is that once a new kind of, if you like, invention or development has been completed, then those that have been involved in it are removed, so they can't talk about it. And it's very clear that David Kelly was removed because he knew where the bodies were buried, if you like. I mean, he had the background knowledge of the Iraqi chemical weapons situation.
Well, the parallel with David Kelly is certainly former CIA director William Colby.
Right.
People. One of the things that many people miss that you don't, of course, and your folks are up on this, is that assassination and murder is a very commonly applied tool in world geopolitics. Now, we know third world countries, we don't think of these so-called developed countries as using that as a tool. It's used all the time.
Exactly. Funnily enough, I was talking to someone very, very recently who is close to a man in North America who is a professional hitman. And he is employed by these various families that we talk about to remove those who are in their way. And he has killed literally hundreds of people. So, this is not Hollywood. This is actually happening. And in terms of David Kelly, of course, he had the background knowledge to show that Blair and Bush were lying through their teeth, as has now become clear, about the weapons capability of Iraq. And when you look at his story, and there's been some excellent stuff on your website about what happened to David Kelly. I mean, it is ludicrous. I mean, when you've got the medics who attended the scene saying that there was very little blood, very little blood around. This is a man who's supposed to have bled to death. Now, I didn't major in, medical bloody science, but I do feel that when you bleed to death, the whole point is that the blood leaves the body in vast amounts, and that's how you bleed to death.
Right.
So how they square that circle of not much blood and someone bleeding to death,
it's
ridiculous.
High-tech bleeding is what it is.
I mean, it's just incredible. But the point is, of course, that the alarm bells go off when someone is removed at precisely the time that suits the establishment. And, of course, David Kelly's a classic.
How about we go back?
Because he could have brought the whole thing down.
Right. Well, here's another classic, Vince Foster. We forget because the pace of news and information is so blinding now. Vince Foster, Fort Marcy Park. No dirt on the guy's shoes. I mean, come on.
It's like there's a big arrow pointing to these things, and it says he was taken out. And people say, I don't see the arrow. What did you say again? The media told me, you committed suicide. But they wouldn't lie to us, would they? And when you look at the Bush family, and indeed Clinton, the list of people who have been taken out, and I include Senator Wellstone in this.
Well, I agree.
Who have been taken out at a time that massively suited the agenda.
That was a surgical extraction, if there ever was one.
I mean, it just goes on forever, these lists. These are serial killers, these people. Again, it's a very good point that you raise, and no one used it better than Margaret Thatcher in this country during her years in office. She said that no matter what happened, however deep a problem may be, if you just, as she said, slug it out and don't kind of fold,
don't blink.
Something else is going to come along and take the headlines, and everyone will forget about it.
That's right.
And that's the way it works.
That's the way it does work. Now, in our last few minutes here, let me turn around and look at our young people again, who in this country are coming up so fast and furiously and so utterly empty. In most cases, there are exceptions, but the functional illiteracy rate of American high school graduates is pushing 70%. The average high school, college senior now, university graduate, the average university graduate in America is on a par with the average high school senior of the 1950s. So we're headed in the wrong direction here, David, and the next generation being brought up on this mind-control popular music with its cadences and its embedded information information which is fed right into the subconscious mind. I mean, these kids at 12 and 13 and 10 can mouth the lyrics to literally scores of songs. They're programmed. They are absolutely mind-washed.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, we use the term programmed and programming, and of course what they talk about on television is television programs and television programming, which
Indeed.
is exactly what it is. I actually feel, I've said this before, and it becomes more obvious as the months pass, I feel so much for young people today, because what they're doing is being subjected to a system of mind control that has been developed over decades, particularly since the 50s, and it has now reached the point where they're being hit with things on a scale that we weren't when we were growing up, and so it's understandable that young people have a lot of problems seeing through things.
Well, a lot of them have, David, as you well know, have a lot of anger. They're angry. I think at some level they know they're being cheated terribly. There's an emptiness about them that I think is very definitely connected to this anger and rage that is fed and reinforced by much of the lyric potential and the actual lyrics of the songs that they're hearing and the music.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, because I've kind of felt that myself. I mean, earlier in my life, I was very, very angry and very, very frustrated. I didn't know why. And now I do realize why, because on a subconscious level, I knew what was going on, and that was affecting my conscious way that I interacted with the world. So I can really relate to what you've just said. And of course, the food additives and stuff.
Oh, hundreds of chemicals.
This is all designed to undermine the young person's ability to manifest their true magnificence. And it's because, and I've learned about this over the years, these guys know that this awakening is happening, and they're desperate to suppress it. And the vast amounts of things that are going on in the world are not actually to give the Illuminati more power. They are to ensure that they hold on to what they already have, because they know this awakening is coming. This is why they're hitting us from all angles now. But I have to say that well, two things. First of all, this voice in the Amazon rainforest was very clear when it said there is this awakening is not a maybe. It's not a if things go right, think things will get better. This awakening is a done deal. This whole thing is coming down, and it's coming down because humanity's sense of reality is going to transform so dramatically that their experience reality will transform with it. It has to, and this whole control is coming down. And what it said was it's going to come down once it reaches a critical mass point so fast you won't believe how fast it will come down. And the other point I would make about America, I think, again, I feel particularly for America, because it's very clear to me, researching over the years, that American society was actually set up by the Illuminati powers in Europe as a mind control experiment. And what they've done is experimented on the American people in what most effectively suppresses them physically, mentally, emotionally. Food additives, fast food, soundbite television, where an interview clip of 25 seconds is considered long. In other words, lack of substance, superficial media.
All style.
And what happens is, and has happened, is that those things that work on the American people in terms of the outcome that these guys want are then exported to the global population. And at that point, people say, oh, see, the American bloody culture's everywhere. There's McDonald's, it's this and it's that. It's all the American programming and Hollywood movies. It's everywhere. No, it's not the American culture that is being exported. That's just what it appears to be. What's being exported are those things that suppress people mentally, emotionally, and physically most effectively, being exported to the rest of the world after they've been shown to work in America. So America is the place, the epicenter of this whole global conspiracy for historical reasons, and that's where the revolution that is going to bring this down is really going to manifest from, and the rest of the world will follow. That's the place it's going to happen, and it will happen, and it is happening.
Wow, David, 2 hours went by much too quickly. I will look forward to our next conversation. Let me know when it's the right time. In the meantime, always good to speak with you, my friend. Take good care.
You too, Jeff. Thanks a lot.
Okay, good night. or good morning over there where it's 5 a.m. David can get back to sleep for a few hours anyway. But after that performance, I kind of think he'll be up for a bit. Tales from the Time Loop. Once again, the phone number 903-876-3416.